Hi, David. Welcome to our show, Life's Multiverse. Today we're having you here with us, so I'm very excited about this episode.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Albert. And I'm also looking forward to seeing what comes out of our conversation today in this
Absolutely.
multiverse.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's start straight away with our topic. Like, let's start by explaining this fascinating topic that you were talking about your mindfulness.
Right. So I was recently on a cruise, and the interesting thing is, Albert, this book came to me. I did not order it. Talk about synchronicity, right? And so I had the opportunity to go through the content, and it certainly resonated with me in terms of a multiverse theory, where if you take a look at what they were discussing in the book, it's about our narrative, the story that we have created that may not be reality based, that becomes our segment of the multiverse. Now, the good news is we can change that story. And I think about my own life and an example of a faulty recollection that was part of the narrative. I have a birthday coming up, and it's the day after Halloween. And what I thought was the story behind the day before the delivery was that my mother was attending a Halloween party dressed as Goldilocks. Okay. And I carried that story with me forever, and I expanded on it with people. And it wasn't until years later, I mean, decades, when I brought this up to her, she said, "Where did you ever get the idea that I was dressed as Goldilocks?" I was dressed as a gypsy. Pretty far from Goldilocks, right? But
Right.
it's an example of how we create and carry a story with us. Now, certainly that's not a story that would have a dramatic impact on my life, but I now have a new version of that story that takes into account what she shared with me. So the whole idea behind this is, what are the stories that we create that affect the current multiverse that we find ourselves in? And I'd just like to get from you what your thoughts are about the multiverse.
Sure. So what you said absolutely resonates with our concept of multiverse in general. Um, I take the multiverse as well, it is based on scientific theory, right? It's not absolutely proven yet, but it is some sort of physics, domain of physics, that says there are multiple universes existing at the same time, simultaneously. And whenever, like the theory goes, like whenever you make a decision, any decision in your life, the universe branches into two. So this is what this theory suggests, basically, that there are two versions, two like distinct, unique branches of the universe created from at this exact decision point, and two completely different lives are being lived simultaneously, but in different dimensions that have absolutely no communication between each other. So this is my thought on the multiverse. And what you said is absolutely like goes absolutely well with this idea, because you are creating with this narrative the branch of the universe that you are living in, right? But my question would be here, like, what are your thoughts on changing your narrative? Or do you think, like, for some people, they would think like, okay, I've been living multiple decades on this narrative. For example, if we're talking about general idea of purpose, let's say, of your purpose in life, and then you found out that there are gaps in your original story or original narrative that you created for yourself, like the example you mentioned where you found out that it was falsy, technically, the assumption about your mother's Halloween costume. But sometimes, as you said, this is not very dramatic, but sometimes we stop upon like some real dramatic concepts that we build our lives on. So how can we resist the or overcome the inertia that comes with this shift that we are going to make to our life?
So that's a great question to ask. And the way that I look at life is through stories. And again, they're my narrative in this current multiverse version of myself. I recently returned from a cruise that one of the stops or ports was Newport, Rhode Island. And this is where the rich and famous spent their summers as part of the Gilded Age. And had the opportunity to go through a summer home that the Vanderbilts built called the Breakers. And as I walked through it, Albert, I thought, I think this is the life I was meant to live. Now, I'm not talking about the 1800s. I'm talking about the 21st century. And my whole thought pattern became, what if? What if I thought abundance, wealth, this type of an environment? What would that do for me? Because there was some part of me that may have been in touch with that other aspect of myself that said, a part of you is living this or has lived this. So this is why it resonates with you. So I could have looked back on the fact that, well, I came from what people refer to as humble beginnings. My father delivered the mail. My mother was called a housewife at the times. And I didn't think that there were a lot of options open to me, even though I knew that I had the so-called potential. And so I lived my life making those choices, just like you talked about, those decisions that brought me to where I am today. Now, it's a question of, in this moment where we're having this recording, can I make a different decision? Which could be about my purpose. What is my purpose in life? Well, obviously, part of my purpose is sharing my story with others so that they realize that they can do the same. So I have to let go of that old story of limitation. A lot of limiting beliefs around that, Albert. People with my background can never be financially successful. Look at the strength of that statement and how it creates the multiverse that I live in today. So what happens if I change that narrative and say, I have incredible potential? And part of it is with the money, but it's also about a whole lifestyle that I have that is a part of this. The idea of sharing with thousands, if not millions of people, my story that can affect their futures, just like it can affect mine. So I think that this whole idea of what was is what was, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I think about, well, could I change the facts around that? Well, just like with my mother's story about what she wore for Halloween, what prevents me from doing the same with any other aspect of my life? So I think that, it's really the power of believing that in the power of choice and decision making then can create a whole different future for us. People talk about, well, I can't change the past. Well, maybe I can, because that past is only memories, right? And it's only information that I believed to be true. It may or may not be valid. Mm-hmm. So we look at all of this and the idea of each decision that we make that creates those divergent paths. What we fail to remember is as soon as we make that decision, two more decisions follow instantaneously, right?
Mm-hmm.
So something as simple as you're walking and you make a decision to turn right versus left.
Right.
Okay. Now, when I go right, it is a different environment than if I turn left. So then based on that environment, more decisions come my way. So it would probably boggle the mind as to how many of those decisions we make during the day.
Yeah.
It could be tens of thousands that are each creating divergent paths.
Exactly. Yeah, that goes exactly with the theory of the multiverse, because there is also a well-known theory in physics called the butterfly effect. I'm not sure, like maybe you're familiar with it as well, which states that a very subtle change that you make in your decisions or in life in general could generate a whole new or different outcome. This is also fascinating because sometimes from these like decisions you were mentioning, like the overwhelming amount of decisions, and some of them are very subtle and small, but sometimes a very small decision, as small as changing the street that you're taking home, for example, it could have a huge impact on your life. It could change your life, basically. Yeah, this butterfly effect, it works in physics. They say that a butterfly, if a butterfly was in Tokyo, for example, could cause a storm in the US. So it is that powerful, this effect, and very little changes could generate very different outcomes. And another thing I wanted to add on what you're talking, or I wanted to ask you, is since you mentioned that you can change your path and change your narrative, and you can manifest, for example, abundance or different like conditions that from the ones you were conditioned to, right? Because your mind created this multiverse for you. But I wanted to just ask you, what's your thought on the manifestation itself? How can you effectively do that? And there is also another part of the theory that maybe the other things or your goal is also manifesting you. What do you think of that?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
The whole idea of manifestation, it's interesting, Albert, because one of the things that I started many years ago was I have 101 wishes. And this came about as a result of a book that I read by Jack Canfield. And he talked about creating 101 wishes, which is different from a bucket list. I said, for a bucket list, that's focused on dying. A wish list is focused on living. And so I have the 101 wishes, and every once in a while I will review them. In fact, I just reviewed them yesterday following this trip. And two of those wishes were manifested. And so they go into a different pile. And someone says, well, what happens when you achieve all 101 wishes? I said, every time a wish happens, it's replaced with a new one. And believe me, my thing is wish big. Don't say, oh, I wish I had a clean closet. No, my wish is I'm going to vacation in Bali. I'm going to be on podcasts on a regular basis. Now, that is the wish. That's the desire. That's the thought. And we know that everything begins with a thought, right? And then the thought goes through a process to becoming a reality. Now, we don't know exactly when that reality is going to show up. It could be years before that happens because all of the circumstances need to come together for that to happen. So what I've learned is in manifesting, once we put that out there, we have to let go of the how. Okay, and that is a big part of it. And that's probably what scares people the most because they think they have to control the process. Well, once you've put that out to either the universe or the multiverse, it will respond in kind to create that. So an example of that for me was a number of those wishes had to do with going to the Baltic, to St. Petersburg, to the Hermitage, and I had to let go of the how. Well, before that, a couple that we knew was celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary and said, we'd like for you to join us on a cruise to Alaska. All right, so we put all of the plans together 2 months before the trip, and it was planned 2 years ahead. They said, we have to cancel because the wife had some issue with her passport because we were going through Canada. So we talked to our travel agent, and she said, well, Alaska is a big ticket item right now. Would you be willing to trade that to go to the Baltic, which includes St. Petersburg, the Hermitage, okay? And there it was. It all happened, and it was even better than what we could have imagined. Now, the interesting thing is, Alaska is not on my wish list. See, the universe responded with, oh, that's not something that you desire, so I'm going to manipulate reality, or however you want to look at it, for what you want to manifest. So it really requires patience. And I will tell you that some of the wishes had to be removed because if it involved a person, that person died. And so the idea of meeting them in this multiverse was unlikely. My question then becomes, so when you put out a wish and something like this occurs where that option doesn't appear to be realistic anymore, did it occur in another multiverse?
Yeah, that's a very valid assumption.
Yeah. And people's deaths in the multiverse that we occupy, does their death coincide with what happens in another multiverse? Or can they continue to live? Because remember, not only are we making these decisions, everyone else on the planet is doing the same, right? So maybe for them, rather than, well, they died from cancer, cancer wasn't present in their life based on the decisions that they made or whatever the plan was for them. So they're still alive. And if you want to call it an alter ego, that other piece of me that lives in an alternative universe could have had that conversation. I never even thought of that until our conversation today. Because rather than say, it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen in this version of the multiverse.
Exactly. Yeah. There is also a theory that says our perception of time is completely subjective to the human experience. Like in the universe, there's no clear sense of like past, future, or present, where all the multiverse, like the multiverse exists simultaneously, So what do you make of that, and what do you make of its relation to our consciousness when we are like, how can we be conscious in this multiverse where, like, how our consciousness percept time?
Right. And so in my studies, I agree with you that time is a human construct. And the purpose of time is to locate us in space so that somehow we can coordinate what our activities are with others. And so we have created this concept of past, present, and future. Well, what I always say to people is the past is simply a set of memories, okay? Then the future is just a set of predictions that, again, based on those decisions that you're making at any given moment. So if you look at time, it's not linear. I see it as vertical, okay? And we just move through that verticality of whatever time is to us. And that becomes really exciting because the messages that we've gotten from people who are well known is about living in the moment. you
Mhm.
know, just stay in the moment and be aware of what that moment is bringing you, because otherwise you're going to miss so much of life. What is it? There's a famous saying, and you're going to pardon my French on this. I have one foot in the past, one foot in the future, and I'm pissing on the middle, which is the present. And so
Right.
we have to be mindful of that. How are we using this current moment as our experience? And again, as soon as we make conscious decisions to use it in the best way possible, think about what those next branches will look like, because they will begin to draw to us the experiences that reflect that.
Mhm.
Again, the how, we don't know. But the other thing I hear people say to me is, after I share what I do in my life, they say, I want your life. I've heard this so many times, Albert. My response is always the same. You can have my life only if you're willing to go through what I did to get here.
Right.
See, I don't share that story of what got me to this time. And
Mhm.
believe me, the story would have been not one that was extremely positive. There was a lot of negativity. People used to say to me, you're your own worst enemy. And now I have to be my own best friend. So that's another thing to look at. How are you being your own best friend today? And that's in the story that you tell.
Right, right. This is very important actually, because it reminds me of like when everyone, it's especially important in our day and age with social media, when we see people and we wish that we have their lives, you know, we see celebrities, we see successful people. But the question is, do you really want their whole life? Because when you are just picking the side that you like, because you don't know other aspects of their lives as well as their past or even their future. Are you willing to like handle the future that comes with this life? This is a very important thing to think about. What do you
Well,
think?
yeah, in alignment with that, if you see someone's life and you say, oh, I want that, ask yourself, what piece of that would I want to have present in my life? Make it a wish. Okay.
Mhm.
Turn it into a wish, a desire, a thought, and then release it and watch what happens. Now, again, based on our discussion today, if it doesn't happen in your current multiverse that you're experiencing, is there a possibility it's going to happen in the other multiverse?
Right.
And, when you look at it that way, Albert, think of the freedom, because then you're not feeling confined. And you think, oh, I'm going to put this out there. And if I don't experience it in my personal world, maybe that alter ego will, and good for them. I hope they're happy with it. And maybe they'll do the same for me, because I don't think it's one-sided, that the decisions that they're making probably include us in some respect.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, this is fascinating. Actually, you mentioned a very sensitive word, which is freedom. And I'm very curious to know your thought about freedom, speaking on all of this. Because, for example, let's say I have a wish and I'm trying to manifest that. But the whole world and the whole universe is interconnected, right? So my wish coming true might mean that someone else will be affected by that. Someone else's life will be altered and diverged in order to match my expectations and my wishes. So here it triggers the thought in my mind that how freedom goes with this whole interaction between the elements in the universe. Because when you think of it, for example, you made your wish come true by visiting St. Petersburg, right?
Right.
But at the same time, that means some like people you were gonna pay in Alaska, they didn't get this payment, so their life has been altered somehow. Like it is like all the decisions are impacting others' lives. So how does freedom play in all of this?
So if we look at the model that we're describing here, Albert, circumstances occurred that took me to the Baltic, including St. Petersburg. Now, the decision was, and I could have made it and did at one point, no, we can still go to Alaska. It just won't be with this couple. All right. And that was on the table for a while until the travel agent said Alaska's a hot ticket item.
Yeah.
Now, all of a sudden, a new decision was made to pursue that path. Now, at that point, that was a divergence, go to the Baltic, and then the other version would have been go to Alaska. So that other entity, part of me, would have experienced Alaska and the effect that it had on the people around me, or a version of me, while going to the Baltic, met wonderful people. In fact, we met a couple that we're still in touch with, and we have traveled with them, and it's just been wonderful. Okay, that was what was meant to happen in my version of the multiverse. And then the other went off on its path and probably went to Alaska, because that might have been on my alter ego's version of themselves, that was the plan. So
Right.
it's never with the idea that we have to exclude what could have happened. We just surrender it, which is that form of freedom. Okay, it's just surrendering to the fact that, oh, no decision is ever a wrong decision. It's simply a decision that leads to another decision.
Exactly.
Yeah. So freedom to me is letting go and not trying to control everything around me. So when I have those wishes, I didn't say to myself, well, I really want to go to St. Petersburg, so I'm going to have to manipulate all the circumstances around me for that to happen. The universe says, this is your version of reality. Have fun with it. So as we look at going back to living in the moment, there is a statement, I believe it's in medicine, that says, do no harm. I think that needs to be our mantra, Albert. As you make these decisions, do no harm. Make these decisions knowing that it is in the best interest of not only yourself, but the people around you.
Right.
And then you really get to experience the life that people who I've just met say, I wish I had your life. And it's like, well, do no harm. You know, what is it that you're putting out about the world around you and the people you know? If you're being judgmental about others, it's going to create that life that you live. And those negative emotions of, oh, I hate, I'm angry with. Frankly, those are emotions that we experience as human beings that have a purpose, but in the long run, they don't serve us. Living a life of anger, I've met those people, and they don't become my circle of friends. Okay, living that life of judgment about others. I have to remember that I brought them into my reality.
Right.
Okay, so
and
I don't
what,
know.
like, in your opinion, what is the negative impact of that, of these negativity in general? Like, what is exactly, like, we all know that, okay, it feels unpleasant, right? That's what we say. But from your perspective, like, since we're talking about multiverse and like somehow deeper and the deeper sense of things, what do you think is the actual impact of that?
Well, you know, I like to speak in metaphors because that's who I am. You want to be watering the roses, or do you want to be watering the weeds? Okay, when you're in that negativity, you're watering the weeds. So just create that image of what that would look like. and then what the roses would look like. Which world do you prefer to live in? So,
Definitely.
and I think that's really the impact of negativity. And we know that when we foster that negativity, we pay a price for it emotionally and physically.
Mhm. Mhm.
And again, how is this benefiting you and others? And with the do not harm approach, you're harming yourself with this. And then you get into the yes, but if you really knew that person, it comes back to a decision of you may not want to have that person in your immediate circle. You have the ability to make that decision and wish them well and not interact with them. And I've done that in my life. And believe me, I'm much happier not being around people who live in negativity. So I have a question for you.
Sure.
One of the things that I've thought about related to the multiverse is when you go to sleep at night, okay? And we're not going to
Mhm.
talk about the dream aspect because that's a whole different topic.
Yeah.
When you wake up in the morning, are you the same person who went to sleep that night? Or are you a different version of yourself with a new set of consciousness based on whatever?
That's a very, very good and deep question, actually. I haven't thought of it before, but now thinking of it like expands my consciousness to a different level, because when you think of it this way, you are not making any decisions while you are asleep. So that means from an external point of view, you are technically the same. But at the same time, your brain is very actively working while you are asleep, and your neurons and neural circuits are all like shifting, reconnecting, rewiring. So it is far from the same person. You are like, I wouldn't say completely, but you are definitely changed to some aspect because of your brain activity, because of the decisions that made by your unconscious brain. And this is another idea to think about. Like, does the unconscious brain create new lives or multiverses? Does it like create new branches of lives? Yeah, this is very fascinating to think about. Yeah, what do you think of that?
Well, what I know is that the whole area of research around the brain and what it does is in its infancy, really. And I think you were talking about the science behind all of
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
We know that there is a part of the brain called the reticular activating system
Mhm.
that once you have an idea, a thought, let's say your thought is, I want to own a red convertible. All of a sudden, you start seeing red convertibles all around you.
Yeah,
It's what that brain does to scan the environment for ways to fill that thought. And so I think that, with that being said, the idea of what goes on in the brain, the idea of changing your story is about rewiring. You're really rewiring the brain. So it's not a matter of, oh, I just think about a new past in a different way. No, you have to think about it being your reality until it becomes your reality, because the brain has been rewired to think that way. So
yeah.
we're just learning about that, the power of that rewiring. I know when I was growing up, we were told that, oh, the brain after birth is rather inactive in terms of its growth. It's like whatever you were given at that time, so many neurons, so many brain cells, they start to die off. Okay. And I
Mhm.
guess that was a theory behind Alzheimer's, that maybe when a number of them were gone, that is what you experience. We now know that is not the case. The brain at all ages is constantly rewiring, reworking itself. When people have a stroke, they can rewire their neural pathways. Not that they may function exactly the way they did, but much better than the old idea that once you have a stroke, you're pretty much incapacitated and you learn to live with it. So again, I think all of this is in its infancy. This idea of what happens when you sleep. We're learning more and more about that. And in this book, Mind Your Mindfulness, they refer to this as when you have a problem, we use this old adage of sleep on it.
Yeah.
The idea that you go to sleep, you may feel inactive, but boy, your brain is working double time. And we know that there are famous discoveries. I think one of them had to do with the double helix, that with a person dreamt of two snakes intertwining. And that became the basis.
Covered the DNA, right?
Yes.
Right.
So that's just one story. And so the brain just needs time to step away from its activity in our consciousness during the day and then say, okay, let me go into problem solving mode because I'm really good at that. We have that whole executive function in the human brain that we're still learning about, Albert.
Right. Yeah. The idea you're talking about is referred to as neuroplasticity.
Yes.
Yeah, neuroplasticity is a fascinating topic. It's as you said, it's in its infancy. Not much discovered about that, but it is well proven that the brain is rewiring at all ages, and just the way our brain is wired defines our identity basically. And by changing how, like by rewiring our brains, we can have a different identity that we are really striving for, or we want technically. And this topic, like as easy as it sounds, it's very, very hard to achieve, mostly because of the self-limiting beliefs, as you said from the beginnings, because we surround us with everything, even our environment, everything. Like this reminds me of the book I read recently. It's called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself.
Okay.
It talks about this. It says that our identity is actually formed by a habit of us being ourselves. Like being myself is just a habit. I'm used to waking up every day on the same bed, doing mostly the same routine, mostly thinking about myself the same way. And this is just a habit by itself. And this habit creates our identity. And by changing the way we think about ourselves, we can simply change our identity to something we are longing for. Yeah, we just need to understand that and be willing to do it, which is not easy.
And, when I was young, my identity did not include being on a podcast with you. Podcast hadn't even been dreamed of at that time. Writing books, that was not part of my identity. So doing the career coaching that I do was not part of my identity. That evolved over time. And it occurred as a result of what was possible in the moment. Podcasts weren't possible back then. We didn't have the technology for it. Right. So again, that brings in the idea of if you have a wish or a thought, it may need time to incubate. Where all of the circumstances that are needed fall into place. And I know that the home that I live in now started out, before the pandemic, way before, in terms of I want to move. I think this is where I want to live. Again, I don't know how. Then the pandemic hits. Well, that stops everything from moving forward. You fast forward, I'm in Europe. I get an email from the realtor saying that your house, there's an offer on it that's really good. And at the same time, the house that I live in now came up for sale.
Wow.
And then other circumstances evolved to where this is the home of my dreams. So again, it's giving ourselves the time, but not losing sight of the thought or the wish. And I said, I know this is where I'm going to live, even though the circumstances said no. I said, this is the home of my dreams. If it's meant to be, it will be.
Right.
And if not, then maybe it was meant to be for another version of me in another multiverse. And again, all I can do is wish the best. And I hadn't even thought of this. Keep wishing the best for that other part of you.
Yeah,
Because
this
yeah,
part of letting go. I think this is a part of letting go.
right.
So you let go of the things that you are clinging to in trade of like offering your other versions a good life or wishing for it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes absolute sense.
So this whole idea of the multiverse, people are free to choose to ascribe to it or say, oh, it's just a bunch of baloney. So that's a decision that they're making.
Right.
Now, as they make that decision, if they ascribe to it, they're going to see its effects. If they say it's a bunch of baloney, guess what? They're still going to feel the effects.
Absolutely.
It's not going to go away. It's just that they will have experiences that support that.
Right. Yeah, they have just removed it from their mental model of the word.
Right.
But that doesn't change the facts that's happening and the divergence or the if it was like truly based on physics, so that will not change the physical structure of the universe
That's
technically.
right.
Yeah.
Yes. And so my guess is that the people who will be listening to this podcast are the people who are more likely to ascribe to this belief. And
Mhm.
so they can then experience the world, hopefully, based on what we've discussed today, and see the power that they hold in creating the life that they have, not in the future, okay? Because we don't know what decisions are going to follow, but the decisions that they make in the present
Yeah.
that lead to the next decision of do no harm is what I am deciding to do, benefiting myself and others. And I think what happens for people is just unbelievable. It goes way beyond what they could have even imagined. It takes them to the life that people say to me, I wish you had, that they had.
Yeah, that's awesome. David, as we're coming to an end of our episode, I just wanted to ask you like any final, let's say, advices that you can give to people in order to facilitate their reaching their full potential in this multiverse and reaching the best version of themselves, as they say.
Well, I think it comes down to mindfulness. I think we need to be mindful of our thoughts, Albert, okay? And not just let them be spontaneous and asking, where did that come from? And it's living a life, as you say, a purpose. What is my purpose today? And I think in my life, at my point of turning 75, is that I only have one purpose. It's to be of service to myself and others. And if I live that purpose, everything that needs to support that comes to be. It's like opportunities like talking with you today. That is part of my purpose, is sharing my story. And again, it's the story that I know today. That story could change tomorrow based on new information. And then I have to ask myself, is that information valid? Or is that simply someone else's story that they're sharing with the idea that it might become part of mine? Whoa, we can become overwhelmed by that. So it's just, again, living in the moment. I have published a journal called Ponderings, and it's great. It falls along the lines of what we've been discussing today. It's all positively focused, and people can find that on Amazon. It's Ponderings, Daily Reflections for Inspiration and transformation. And that's what we've been talking about today, inspiration and transformation.
Yes, that's very helpful. I would share the link in the description, so if you could send it to me. And it was an absolutely interesting conversation. Thank you so much for all the thoughts you shared, David. It is absolutely food for thought for everyone and something to think about before you sleep at night today. So thank you so much, David, for being here, and I hope to see you again later.
Okay, Albert. Well, thank you for inviting me. And it certainly has led to lots of food for thought for even myself after our conversation.
Amazing to
All
hear.
right.
Thank you.